So paragraph 9, he begins, consider the mask neurotic syndrome so pervasive in the young generation. There's ample empirical evidence, there's a lot of empirical evidence that the three facets of this syndrome, depression, aggression, and addiction, which we've mentioned, are due to what in logotherapy is called the existential vacuum, a feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness. So there he gives us a very concise definition of the existential vacuum, a feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness to our existence. It goes without saying that not each and every case of depression is traced back to a feeling of meaninglessness, nor does suicide always result from an existential vacuum. So the idea is that just because you're in an existential vacuum does not mean suicide will come from that. But this is oftentimes where suicide does come from, a sense of meaningless, hopelessness. But even if each and every case of suicide had not been undertaken out of a feeling of meaninglessness, it may well be that an individual's impulse to take his life would have been overcome had he been aware of some meaning and purpose worth living for. So, of course, this makes sense. If you don't need anything, how often do you go to the mall? Probably not very often, because you don't need anything there. But if you do need stuff, how often do you go to the mall? Probably pretty frequently. You won't go somewhere unless there's something there for you. The future is no different. You won't go towards the future unless you think there is something for you in that future. If you think that there's nothing for you, you aren't going to be too excited about getting there. In fact, you may even stop yourself from getting there. But if you think that there might be something, even if you think that there might be something there for you, or something great, or something interesting or exciting or whatever, it gives you a reason to keep going. I wonder if any of you ever think about this, like you think about what the world's going to look like in 1,000 years, and it bugs you that you're not going to get a chance to see that. I wonder if any of you guys look at the world and go, I wonder what the world's going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. If you have an extreme thirst for that kind of stuff, a real curiosity for that stuff, then you're probably going to want to hang out and see what the world looks like in that many years. I think I was telling you, I was at the doctor's last week, and there was a woman in there who was 94 years old. I think she was 92 years old. 92 or 94. But in any event, think about what she has seen in the last 90 years. How much the world has changed. It's unbelievable what she has seen. So you can forgive her for not knowing how to work the little kiosk so she can check herself in. Because what she does know is exceptional, and what she has done probably is exceptional, which will relate us back to the last paragraph of the text. And then paragraph 11, if thus a strong meaning orientation plays a decisive role in the prevention of suicide, what about intervention in cases in which there is a suicide risk? So he mentions this thing here, meaning orientation. Meaning orientation is an orientation, a direction for your life because you have meaning in some way. So if you have a meaning and a purpose, you will direct your life towards that thing. And he points out that as a young doctor, I spent 4 years in Austria's largest state hospital, where I was in charge of the pavilion in which severely depressed patients were accommodated. And so he goes on to explain with people who were exceptionally depressed what they were going through. And he points out that every therapist is going to point out to you, I think every probably wise person is going to point out to you, that as bad as things are today, are they going to get better tomorrow? Maybe not. How about the day after that? Maybe not. Day after that? Who knows? But at some point, things will get better. This is part of the problem of suicide. It's the loss of hope. If you don't think there's anything for you in the future, you aren't going to want to get there. Just like if you don't think there's anything for you at the mall, you're not going to want to get there. I understand I'm downplaying the analogy, but you get the point. If you think that there's something for you over there, that there could be something for you in that future, then you're going to want to get there. You're going to want to see what it looks like. The idea is that you have to, things will get better, but you have to be here for them when they do get better. In other words, one of the things I always think about is, man, imagine if you had I think about a friend of mine, for example, who has Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, I can't remember. I think it's Alzheimer's. Whatever, that was funny. And I think about this, when I was doing my doctoral work, my neuropsychology professor was saying that he thought that we were about 10 or 15 years out from a cure for Alzheimer's. We're close to it. And I always think back to my friend, like, man, wouldn't it be terrible if, the day before they found a cure, he died. Yeah, it's like, you go to the funeral, then on your way home, you're reading the newspaper and you see, the cure was just found. The idea is if you just hang on a little bit longer, there might be something for you at the end of that. And that's true with any treatment at all. For anything at all, whether it's psychological or whether it's physical. There's always hope that things can get better tomorrow, even if it's just depression. The idea is that things can get, but you've got to be here for it to get better. And as he's pointing out in paragraph 11, things do get better for everybody. It's across the board. But you've got to be here to receive that. And he continues, as for addiction, paragraph 13, I'm reminded of the findings presented by Anne-Marie von Forstmeyer, who noted that, as evidenced by tests and statistics, 90% of alcoholics that she studied suffered from an abysmal feeling of meaninglessness. Which, again, makes sense. If what you're living in right now is hopeless, then you're going to want to kind of split off from there and experience some other type of reality that helps you to forget that. Now, paragraph 14, let us turn to the question of meaning itself. Consider a movie in which thousands and thousands of individual pictures start to make sense, and it creates a meaning. You're not going to understand the meaning of a life until you can kind of sit back and look at it. I remember asking you guys at one point to talk to people who have undergone some significant life changes over the years. And then ask the person, at the time that these things were happening, did you think of it as, things are going to be, this is terrible, I can't believe this is happening to me, why me? But then in retrospect, you sit back and realize, that was a really good thing that happened to me. Because if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be here today. And maybe you're happy with where you are today. You can think of life like that. You've got to sit back at the end of the movie and go, okay, the tragic thing that happened, does that mean they weren't tragic? No. But the outcomes can still be good on that. So paragraph 16, how does a human being go about finding meaning? It's a hell of a question. How do you go about finding meaning? He says that logotherapy conceives of conscience as a prompter, which indicates the direction in which we have to move in a given life situation. So if you pay attention to your conscience, it'll point you in certain directions. He continues, as logotherapy teaches, there are three main avenues on which one arrives at meaning in life. So, I was mentioning last period, we have this, I see these stupid things on Instagram from time to time. I wish, school didn't teach me anything. And then people will complain about how they can't do their taxes or fill out a rental agreement on an apartment. If you went through school and you didn't learn how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide, to do taxes, or if you didn't learn how to read, which is the instructions for how to do that stuff, the problem wasn't school. It was you. It was you. And by the way, chances are it was taught, but you were sleeping. You had your head down. So if we're talking about something significant in school, here's one right here. How do you find meaning in life? How do you arrive at meaning in life? That's way more important than any rental agreement you're going to look at. The first is by creating a work or by doing a deed. The second is by experiencing something or encountering someone. In other words, meaning can be found not only in work but also in love. So creating something, doing a deed, that could be a lot of things. It could be starting a business, it could be being an artist, it could be helping others. And then also, meaning can be found in love, falling in love. But remember, just like happiness, love must ensue. It can't be pursued. Most important, he says, however, is the third avenue, which is even the helpless victim of a hopeless situation, facing a fate he cannot change, may rise above himself, may grow beyond himself, and by so doing, change himself. He may turn a personal tragedy into a triumph, he says here, by taking pride in suffering. And that's a hard thing to do. When you're suffering, I wonder if that's something that ever even occurs to you. Like, oh, I'm suffering. All right, this is good. And we've talked about this. This is Nietzsche's approach. Nietzsche says, when you're suffering, embrace the suffering. Because how do you find meaning? By overcoming suffering. In fact, for Nietzsche, this is maybe even the only avenue, at least certainly the main avenue for finding meaning in life. The meaning in life is to overcome. It's the will to power, to accumulate power, to overcome suffering. And I don't think it's any surprise at all that the axiomatic figure of Western civilization is a person who suffers on a cross. It's 2020. How do we measure the year? Well, by a guy who died on a cross 2,000 years ago. so much of Western civilization is based off of the idea of these Judeo-Christian principles, but especially in the United States, the Christian principles. And so a weird thing when we think about this guy who suffers on a cross, and he didn't do it, he didn't deserve it. It's not something we look at him and say he was innocent, he wasn't guilty of these things, and even if he was guilty, he didn't deserve the things that he got. But we still look at someone like Christ and say, man, he suffered without needing to. But then we'll still look at our own lives and go, man, why me? Because whether you believe in the religious myths or not, the point of the story is that this is a person who is able to embrace the suffering. The idea is that Jesus could have run away at any moment. He says at one point, I could call down angels to rescue myself, but he says, I'm not. He instead embraces the suffering. He goes along with. He never once combats and goes against it. He embraces the suffering, and so what happens? Well, he dies. But in so doing, he transcends that suffering and becomes something so much larger than what he would have been had he survived these things. Now, I'm not saying you should go out and find yourself crucified. But the point is that if we can look at that as a figure of somebody who transcended suffering, there's a model there for us. And this is the one thing that Nietzsche has some things to say about that, but don't miss that. He's going to come back to that in a couple of paragraphs. In paragraphs 19 and 20, he talks about the research that he conducted, especially on soldiers and people who have suffered some severe injuries. So in paragraph 20, he talks about Jerry Long, who was paralyzed from his neck down since a driving accident rendered him quadriplegic in 1983. This person was, so I guess this was 1980. Now, interestingly enough, the person he's talking about, Jerry Long here, ends up becoming a psychotherapist as well. And so you can go online and watch him. He gives speeches and everything. And he's in a wheelchair. He's still quadriplegic and all that in these videos. And you can hear him talk about it. And he has a great line in there, which is something to the effect of that he broke his neck, but he didn't break. But the neck did not break him. So he says, I broke my neck, but my neck didn't break me. And you look at a guy like that and you think, does he know a little bit about suffering? Yeah, he was an athlete and everything before that, But imagine that's how you define yourself. Now, one day you can no longer define yourself that way. Well, this is a guy who knows a little something. And so you can go on YouTube and look him up. His name is Jerry Long, if you're interested. So.